Your journey has been an interesting one up to here. You've questioned so much more than those around you. You've even questioned yourself as to how you could have grown into these thoughts. Am I crazy? When did I begin to think differently? Why do people in general appear so limited in their
Spiritual Dope? I am on here today with Chris McCann. He is a tech business and thought leader, specializing in helping successful people and companies remember who they are and align their life with their purpose. After many years of professional striving at the expense of personal development, he awakened to the need to cultivate an inner life. Chris chartered a new course prioritizing professional achievement led by personal meaning by studying the world's great spiritual texts, training with prominent spiritual leaders, and developing the tools required to navigate life and find real purpose. Today, he manages several ventures that help others find their meaning and purpose, including coaching clients one-on-one, building scale-up sales teams, providing corporate consulting, conscious leadership, and facilitating retreats. Sorry, Chris, I got tripped up there a little bit what we were saying. So I'll tell you right now, it took me a second to remember, Chris and I were going back and forth before this got started, how we got connected. And I wanted to connect with you because, Chris, I'm in the same space as you, as a matter of fact. So I'm in the technology space, have been now for about over 12 years now, right?
Okay.
And what you're talking about really resonates with me. How do we find purpose in like this daily grind, right? How do we wake up every day and be like, what I'm doing today is helping somebody somewhere and is aligned with me spiritually somehow, right? Like, shit, man, how do we make that happen, right? So and I was like, yeah, let's have this conversation. I think that'd be cool. So that's happy to have you on here today, Chris. And I usually like to start these off with the whole idea that you and I are, what are we? We are conduits for spiritual, universal energy, Chris. Whatever's coming through us today is going to somebody on the other end of this, listening in. And there's a message that can only be delivered through you to that person. What's that message today, Chris?
It's like, shut up and get out of your own way. It's really interesting, and thanks for having me on. It's a real pleasure. I love just talking shop and connecting with folks. So I'll put a big fat asterisk on the end of that, which implies that I could be wrong about all of this. Right? So if I ever tell you that I've got it all figured out, then you might as well just come over to my house and just, walk me off into the nearest, plot of land. It's interesting to think about organizations and our role in it. And you and I were talking about this a little bit ahead of hitting the record button. And I'm really fortunate to work for a technology company that has a great product. Like, we literally get people promoted when they adopt our platform and go into production with it. It's a content management platform. And in various sales roles that I've had throughout my career, whether I've been doing technology recruiting, whether I've been pushing stocks and bonds or working a bond desk for, Morgan Stanley, Dean Witter, way back when, trying to borrow the car from my parents, and everything in my life has been a sales job in one way, shape, or form or another. And to have some form of meaning attached to what we do on a daily basis, if we don't own our own enterprise, is absolutely critical. When I think of how we can make an impact, right? And it's different when you're working for a small startup as opposed to working for a Fortune 50 or a Fortune 100 company where you can literally become, badge number 13,743. That happens. And, how do we then ascribe meaning or find meaning in what we're doing on a daily basis? Because, and particularly with the pandemic, Brandon, the concept of work-life balance, which in my mind has always been a fallacy, but those lines are blurred even further when all of a sudden, for those of us that are married or in a relationship or have children or even grandchildren, we all of a sudden found ourselves surrounded by coworkers that were anywhere from 12 inches high to, our grandparents. And so those lines became very blurred. And how do you then go from an office or, commuting into, working from home and you're able to perform this sort of integration. And so a lot of the work that I've been able to do with people, whether it's my team internally at my company or in working with other organizations or individuals, has been distilling the mission, right? And whether it's a mission statement on a 10K for an organization, or it's something that the founders come up with, and then looking for adjectives, like, like a shared interest or a common ground between myself as an employee and the broader organization. And it's a lot less about, I want to be this when I grow up, but what are the adjectives that really energize us as people? And what can I do more of that at least leaves me in a place where I don't feel completely depleted, but I feel replenished? And that's been a really interesting exercise for myself and the folks that work with me and the folks that I work for, as well as my private clients.
That's awesome. I want to bring up the one thing, it's great. I read a little bit of backstory, right? So you started off, you didn't start off like in some of these Fortune 500 companies. You start off as in, a family owned bread company, which I think is really cool too, right? And so, you grew up kind of working and doing the daily grind and you propelled yourself and you kept working, right? You just kept this like really strong work ethic, and had a lot of success in the Fortune 500. And I think that, look, if you grind yourself out, especially with youthful energy, right? As a youth, you can make a lot of things happen. And you made a lot of things happen. And then, at a certain point, you ran into some of these things that you're talking about, right? That this work-life balance and kind of looking for it and realizing, it's kind of a fallacy. And then I'm going to fast forward into the fact that, work-life balance in the pandemic sucked, man. That was awful. Mm-hmm. Still kind of awful, right? It's still kind of going on. I talk about it at home right now. I work from home and I've got my two children. They were home with us for the first year. And even now it's kind of like, it's like, I feel unapproachable sometimes because, I'm over here at my desk. Anytime I'm at my desk, like, my wife's like, don't go in and bother dad. He's working. But like, I'm like, I'd rather they come in and bother me than, whatever's on the phone. Chances are, I'm not saving lives today with what I'm doing. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not like, I'm not in the middle of surgery. Right. Right. And I think that a lot of people, as you probably saw during the pandemic, they realized, where they had the opportunity to rejigger their stuff, right? Like, how do we, what is important to me, right? So I guess I'd be really curious to see kind of what you saw like over in the past couple of years and where people are at, right? In distilling this mission and working towards becoming more replenished. I'm trying to think of it's not Strength Finders. There was Standout 2.0 is
sure, Marcus Buckingham.
Yeah. That's what you reminded me of. And thinking of that, it's a great series, right? Is that kind of what you're doing? Having people focus more on their strengths, where they can go in, leverage their strengths, and at the end of the day, they actually feel replenished because they gave to the company versus something was extracted from them.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I had this conversation 2 weeks ago when I was interviewing a candidate, and in the high tech space, for an organization to all of a sudden shut their doors in this market means that something went very, very wrong, very, very fast. And so I found myself at my first trade show in 2.5 years in Las Vegas. I was at Shop Talk for that, and I was in and out. But the day before, FAST as an organization existed. 2 days later, after receiving 100 million plus in funding, they shut the door. And so a lot of really talented people found themselves out on the street, overnight.
Wow.
And there's one gentleman that I interviewed that I really would love to hire. However, the role that we have open isn't the right role for him. And so we spent a lot of time talking about this. And what I love about Marcus Buckingham's programs, and particularly with Standout, is that weaknesses are weaknesses for a reason, right? And just because you have no interest in them or you want to ignore them and being able to minimize them. But when I found myself, Brandon, in my, we'll call it mid-30s, so I was two children that were teenagers at that point, and struggling to pay bills and trying to figure out life just wasn't working for me, right? And never mind the love affair that I had with vodka at the time too. I realized as I was approaching 40 that I had to do something different. And so I pulled, and this is when Seinfeld was a very relevant, television program. So I pulled a Costanza, and I decided to do the exact opposite of everything I had been doing and hoping to get better results. And it sounds like you've also participated in a lot of programs around self-discovery. So it's anything from Briggs-Meyer to Stand Out to the Enneagram, et cetera, right? Anything that gets us more.
Chris, I'm looking for who I am, right? Like, I'm like, I haven't figured it out. I need like 70 fucking books to figure it out. I'm like, I don't even know, man. Like, cause, real similar to you, right? You get up to this certain point and you're like, man, I've been working really hard. What have I even been doing with myself?
Yes.
And who am I? Like, I've been doing everything people told me I should be doing, and for some reason I'm still kind of stagnant and I'm still unfulfilled.
Yeah. So hell, I was 23 or 22 and I had a house, mortgage. I never finished college. Heck, I barely started. I spent more time doing my radio show than I did anything else. And I did all the things that I thought I was supposed to. And that's just how I was raised, to your point. I mean, being the child 2 generations removed from a gentleman who came over from Poland to start a bakery, if nothing else, I knew how to work hard. But like the movie Christmas Vacation, when Clark is out there in his front yard and he's, getting ready to display the lights in front of his in-laws, and he gets out there and he's like, joy to the world, and goes to connect those connectors and nothing happens. And the mother-in-law scoffs. Audrey, his daughter, looks at him, or looks at the mother-in-law and says, he worked really hard on that. And the grandfather says, so did washing machines. And I don't want to be a washing machine. Yeah. I want to work smart. And so, in this mid-30s, like, turnabout, because you'll hear oftentimes in these programs or reading books, like, whatever you did when you're 8 years old is how you should spend your time today. But fuck, like, is collecting baseball cards going to put my kids through college? Is me sitting in the basement sketching or drawing or, writing poetry or whatever, is that going to move the needle for my family? And like, no. So I started to really focus on the adjectives. So I love to create. If I wanted to play volleyball, but in the middle of Michigan, there weren't any volleyball teams in the winter for men or boys. So I started our own volleyball team, and intramural sports, coaching, leading, coaching my brothers and sisters teams, writing. I loved advanced analytics. I was like crunching numbers on the back of baseball cards when I was a kid. I was like, well, these are the things that I would do in my basement when I get into that flow state where I lose track of time. If I can at least look for these adjectives in the role that I'm in today, right, where I feel empowered and on purpose, and as if I'm part of something that's bigger than myself, maybe that'll work.
Right.
And it did. Right. And, today, and it's funny how when we get out of our own way and we do things that come naturally to us or that we have a proclivity for, where life isn't as hard, there's not as much resistance. You don't have to fight it, and you can be in the flow. Right.
Chris, real quick, do you mind, for somebody that might not be familiar with flow state, right? I know that you and I, we've been like, we're so deep in it, right? Like flow, I know exactly what you're saying, but somebody who's listening, even though I've shared it on every podcast probably as well, but this could be the first one that they ever listen to. So flow state, what does that mean to you? And a little bit about that.
The flow state for me is when I just lose track of the concept that we call time. When I'm doing something that just feels right, and feel is the operative word there, right? And you've had perhaps meditations, or perhaps you've done some sort of plant medicine where you begin to at least have a reference point as time being a construct as opposed to something that actually exists. And if there's one thing that the listener or that your audience has done in their lives where time slowed down, that feeling becomes a reference point, and you can start to lean into and explore more of what's available to you, where you feel in the zone. And perhaps it's because you're playing softball, and the softball all of a sudden looks like a watermelon, and you couldn't not hit it. These moments are few and far between, but they're provided to us to help us remember our true nature and that we are on purpose.
Yeah, man, I love that. And you're using these words like, empowered, on purpose, other words like integration. Are these some of the words that you're bringing into the companies to get people to kind of charged and again, what'd you say here, kind of feel more replenished? Is this the stuff that you're kind of bringing in there?
It is. And, a lot of it is really intuitive, Brandon. I've been on the receiving end, or I've been a victim of a lot of motivational speeches in my professional career, right? What I want to know is what's the one or two things that I can take away and actually implement or use in my daily life, right? I don't need a guy coming from a van down by the river, rolling into our office or rolling into our high school auditorium, telling me about the perils of alcohol or anything like that. I want something tangible and something that I can use. And it's one thing for someone to tell you or for someone to tell me what the answer is, but anything that's sticky, anything that creates lasting change in my life has been because I've had a realization, and perhaps someone shed a light on it, someone illuminated it for me, but until I can experience it and make it my own, it's not going to stick. So I like to think that whether it's me as a sales leader with my 12 direct reports, or it's me working with organizations, I like to think that I can help them find their own answers. There's really three layers to that. And whether it's, at home with my family or at work or in working with, individuals, someone can come to you, and as a frontline manager and you're coaching, right? And this applies to the work that you do and the work that I do, where you're basically saying, okay, here's the play that we're going to run. Right. And there's the teaching aspect as well, and where you're teaching them the fundamentals of how to be coached. So I'm going to teach you how to do a crossover dribble, to use a sports analogy, but this is part of a broader play. And that's the coaching, the teaching aspect. But when the rubber hits the road and where lasting change begins is when people will come to you for advice. The flip side of that is then being vulnerable enough on my side as a man and as a human who has a lot more questions than I do answers, and being open to receiving advice. One of the things that you had mentioned around, this journey of, being a baker all the way to where I am today, my father-in-law and I sat down last week, and we were back in the Midwest for spring break. And, he's 78. Self-made, put himself through Harvard, hard scrabble, Ohio guy. He still drives one of Billy Corgan's Ferraris around. He's just a really interesting guy. And we're having dinner, and he looked at me, and he's across the table, and he's like, Chris, it's like, can I offer something to you? And I don't want you to take it out of context. I said, absolutely. And he's like, you're a put me in coach sort of guy. He's like, okay, tell me more. He's like, you're a put me in coach guy. Like, just put me in and I'm going to figure it out. He's like, look at what you've done just in the 12 years since I've known you. And he's like, but that's not a bad thing, Chris. He's like, I'm the same way. He's like, you put me in, coach, I'm going to figure it out, and I'm going to do it right. I'm going to do it well. He's like, but how do you know what's not happening around you or what is happening around you? And I was like, well, tell me more. He's like, well, how do you know? He's like, you have a lot riding on Content Stack. You have a lot invested. You have a lot of options that are on the table. And there's no guarantee that those options are going to be worth anything, when you're fully vested in 14 months. He's like, so my question to you, Chris, is how are you going to make yourself more aware of what's going on around you? And I had to sleep on it. So the next morning I woke up and I was like, I got it. Like, I have my own internal board of directors, Brandon, and I have a nutritionist. I have a fantastic general practitioner. I had a strength and conditioning coach when I was competing. I have spiritual teachers. I have everything except for this business gap. And I'm in a frontier here where I've never been part of a post Series B organization with 12 direct reports. It's working its way toward an IPO. I don't have access to the board of directors where I'm sitting in on meetings any longer. So I'm actively searching for a mentor who has done this and been where I've been. Now, this is me as a 49-year-old man. If it were 5 years ago, would I have been open to that sort of advice? Would I have been vulnerable enough or willing to listen to someone as opposed to being a put me in coach sort of guy? Like, I wanted to be able to turn to him and receive that sort of guidance and advice and kind of hack my own professional development. Like, why would I not listen to someone who's a septuagenarian and pull on that? It's absolutely critical, and that's really part of listening and feeling in. And I'm very grateful that he was able to share that with me. So anyone out there wants to be my mentor, I'll take it.
Well, it's funny you bring it up, right? Like, I wrote down, I always do this, right? So there's I don't know if I think it's national, but it's called the Service Corps of Retired Executives, right? My grandfather was a member of that. And, this is a group of people, retired executives. I don't know what else to tell you, right? That it's an organization that helps people in business, right? They've been there. And I think one of the things that we do such a shitty job of is like, listen, don't get me wrong. Like anybody younger than us, full of the vim, vitality, vigor, disruptive, and all this other stuff, we completely neglect everybody that's gone ahead of us. We're like, well, they can't even work an iPhone. So what the hell would they know? Right. But, just because they can't work an iPhone doesn't mean like, I don't know, let's look at marketing over the past 100 years. Marketing hasn't changed. The application of the marketing has changed. Like where you put your billboard up has changed. Right. The rest of it is all the same. Same thing with business. Same thing with a lot of this other stuff. I think that a lot of that's the same. And so I think the story that you tell is really cool, though. You're looking to somebody that's been there before. I did something very similar with my father-in-law. I think I was still drinking. So it's beyond 5 years ago. That's how I see mark time before or after drink. So he and I we were sitting down and, he's a great guy. And I don't think too many people, talk with, just have a real conversation with him, right? Just kind of like heart to heart. And I said, you know what, Mr. Clark, I was like, what would you have done different? Looking back, what would you have done different? He was very successful in his own right, and throughout his own life. And he goes, I would have spent more time with my family. I mean, that was it, right? Like that was enough for me. And so like, a lot of the things that I've done, I always go back to that in my head. Just, it was a 10-minute conversation, but it was very impactful, right? Being able to, again, look to the people that have been there before you, man, like, one way or another. So, I think that's a great story. And I love the, put me in coach guy, right? Like, I mean, you go in, you jump in, you go do it. Right. And you're going to do whatever it takes. That's what I'm, hearing you say, right? Do it right. Do it well. I love the thing too, like, and you got it on your website too. You don't have all the answers. You've learned how to ask better questions, right? You're doing all this through, let's also just reiterate, this is through kind of a spiritual, I guess, maybe there's an awakening in you. Let's hit on that for a second. Where does that hit you? Right. And tell me a little bit about that.
Everything, I didn't know that things weren't possible growing up. Right. And it's not because we had everything handed to us. It's just, I think that's just how I came flying out of my mother's womb. Like life is one big grand adventure. And one of my board of directors tells me and reinforces that I chose the super deluxe premium package when I came into this lifetime because I've got all the experiences. And I say that because I know there's so much more out there. And it was May 5th of 1990. I remember this distinctly, and the context to this is a little bit different today than it was when I remembered this happening to me. I was 16, maybe 17 years old. Yeah, I just turned 17, and I had gone out on a date with my girlfriend and just wasn't feeling it. And I said, you know what? I'm going to take you home. I just want to spend some time by myself. And it happened to be the 5th year anniversary of my paternal grandmother passing away at the age of 59. And so I guess I was, 12 when she had passed. And at some point during that night, I remember seeing a light come in the window. Whether I was dreaming or it actually happened, if it's all fantastical storytelling, I don't know. But definitely impactful. And as this light came in through this tiny window, it was like straight out of a Disney movie, and then sat on the end of my bed. And I sat up automatically. And it was my grandmother's voice, although it wasn't her form. And she's like, Chris, I'll always love you. I'll always be here when you need me. And how could you feel like I didn't love you? And then I remember a dialogue happening, although the words are forgotten, but certainly felt. And this went on for some time. Now, the next morning I woke up, I felt amazing. I'd completely forgotten about the experience. And then halfway through the day, I was like, oh my God, this actually happened. And that was the first reference point I had of this otherness that existed. And then, of course, it was 19, 20, married, kids, drinking, divorced, 15 years of clooning it and trying to figure it all out. And I had lost sight of this this otherness, or perhaps a truer nature of reality. To be followed by lunch in Chicago with a friend of mine, and we were talking about spirituality and religion, and it's a couple of old school Chicago sales guys getting together over lunch, and the conversation quickly pivoted. And he's like, Chris, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but there's something called the Akashic Records. I learned this from this woman here in Chicago, and she's like a grandmother, and she'll give me advice, and I learned how to do this, sort of reading and tuning in. And for him to say that to me really struck me. Now, you know how these things work. 3 days later, I'm back in Santa Monica. I go into our local yoga studio, and the owner says, hey, Chris, you might be interested in this event, but we have this woman, Helen, coming in, and she's doing Akashic Records readings, and I thought you'd be interested. And I was like, who am I to say no? And, so I leaned into that. And so that was my first experience, sitting around with someone who's got these psychic medium capabilities. And Brandon, I'm hard charging, type A, charismatic. And of course, I had something to do. I had something more important to do. And so I had already arranged to be able to leave early, right? Because I had to get my son to his doctor appointment. And she's like, well, Chris, and there's 6 or 7 other people sitting around. And she's like, Chris, I know that you have to leave early. So if you want to go first, by all means, go ahead. And so, we're sitting in a circle, and I looked at Helen, who's a very dear friend, at this point in our lives. And I said, well, here's the deal. Like, everything's coming up roses. Like, I was sleeping on a couch and picking up cigarette butts off the sidewalk, so many years ago. And now I live near the beach in Santa Monica. I have a beautiful wife, beautiful family. My kids are great. I want to know, how do I take advantage of all this momentum, right? Like, what else is out there? And she looked at me, and then Brandon, everything just slid away. And it was just as if it were her and I in the room. And she's like, Chris, the first thing you need to know is how proud they all are of you and where you are right now. And it's like, wow. She was just like dead on. And I remember getting into the car because my wife picked me up. We were taking our son to see his doctor. She's like, what happened to you? And I'm usually not at a loss for words. So I fired my psychotherapist, right? Because what's past is prologue. And I started leaning into, my time with Helen. And eventually I was like, I think I'm supposed to learn how to do this. Like, Chris, I've been waiting for you to ask me, that. And so she taught me how to access the records. And then I spent a couple of years being fascinated with that modality. And all of a sudden you have the answer and you want to help everyone. And it's like, come to me. I'll help you with your masters, teachers, and loved ones. And we're going to figure out life together. And this concept of awakening is ever evolving. And I'd like to think that I've removed a lot of the self-fascination from it. And as my dear friend and teacher Carlos says, he's like, keep on trucking, right? It's like, what's behind that? what's behind that and what's behind that. So the reality is that I don't know, as part of this awakening that is constantly folding and unfolding and unfolding. I don't know how it all works. And I'm not fascinated by it either. If, to your earlier point, if I'm getting out of the way and a clear vessel for source or spirit or the creator or whatever it is to move through and be of service, then that's all I need to know. And it takes a lot of the pressure off in having to perform, where you feel like that monkey with the red ass at Brookfield Zoo.
No, for sure. I think it's really cool. First of all, right? Like, I love the idea of, you're 16, you're sitting on the bed, you've got your twinkle twinkle little star moment happening, right? And then, the 20 years goes by, give or take, right? Like, I'm just using round numbers. And I just wonder, and this is just a kind of a theory in my mind. We've got this window of opportunity that presents itself, right? Kind of like the Call of the Hero, Joseph Campbell stuff, right? Like, in our late teens, right? We've got this call to the spiritual space and whatnot. Because I had something similar, right? Like, I think I was like 19. Mine might have been more drug induced, but that's okay. There's like, there's like this calling, this huge pull. And like, I remember leaning into it a little bit then and telling people and being like, yeah, I think I was meant to like go kind of like, do spirituality work, and people give you like the crazy eyes and you're like, well, maybe I'll just keep buffing this car, right? And then so 20 years goes by for you. So I always wonder about like this kind of window of opportunity, and like, if we let it pass, then like we've got to spend the next 20 years grinding it the fuck out, right? So we got a couple opportunities there. Just an interesting thought. I'll let you know after. Maybe you can tell me your kids it sounds like they're older now, right? Like, and just I'll definitely be curious to hear if they've kind of experienced anything like that for themselves. But then I also love that you're sitting there, you're having lunch, right? And I love that, like, it seems to me these spiritual conversations are happening more in our work lives, right?
Yes.
This is a professional. I'm guessing it's a professional meeting, right? A couple of you guys having, trying to just to figure out like what the next, what are the next steps, Chris? What's the next step, Chris? Right?
Yes.
And bringing up Akashic records, and you're like out of nowhere, and then as you said, right, what happens next? Of course, the universe is like, well, Chris seems like he's interested. Let's present it to him, and there it
is. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's really interesting for sure.
So you're doing this work, right? Not like you're doing your day job, but it seems like you're also bringing this type of thought process and modality to other businesses and companies as a speaker, a facilitator. Kind of talk to us a little bit about the work that you're doing that brings this to corporations and sales teams.
It was really by accident. So as part of my leaning into being a spiritual activist and, wanting to bring the Akashic records or psychic mediumship or crystals and incense to the masses, I had created this either or mechanism in my head. I was like, okay, I'm going to put down being a successful sales leader, and I'm going to lean into just doing as many $200 an hour sessions as I possibly can, because I want to be able to help people. And, that went on for some time, but I wasn't able to really find a lot of traction with it, or even for that matter, satisfaction, because, it felt like people were coming with really the same questions. And I'm sure this is true for you as well. It's, why can't I find my life partner, or my relationship sucks? And that I don't have an interest necessarily in just focusing on that. Like my client base at the time was 82% women and 18% men. It's like, where's my life partner? And, I was sitting with Carlos, and I'll reference him again, and he's just a beautiful guy. And I was like, well, how do I make this change? Like, how do I actually go from this to this? And he's like, you do it at work, dumbass.
What's the this to this? What's the this to this that you're trying to achieve, right?
I mean, how do I move from, like grinding away as a sales guy to just being of service to people and
Right,
just
yeah.
helping? And he's, and so his pivot was, you're doing it. And I sat with that and I was like, oh my God, like I have so many opportunities in front of me, to bring these worlds together, right? And to where I can play at work and be well compensated for it. It's a deal structure, okay. But then someone today that's an executive in the company called because they just wanted some advice on something else. And you don't know where you're going to be able to be of service. And this idea of linearity between, if I do this, this is the result. Well, now I know that, as an example, if I do this and I make myself available to serve, this other mechanism, my company might just say, hey, Chris, we're going to give you 10,000 more options because of this. So it's not a direct transaction, right?
Yeah, I talk about that, right? The whole idea of us looking for linearity because the story works on a timeline and a straight line in our mind. I think that, linearity does exist in once we begin to apply spirituality and or other. Talk to me about that. What are you seeing?
Yeah, no, I feel like it disintegrates. And I know it frustrates my wife to no end.
Yeah, I want to find out kind of how she's feeling about all this stuff too, right?
Yeah, so she loves to listen to these podcasts and then hold me accountable for what I put out there. And that these timelines are really slippery, right? And even if we're going to consider the idea of past lives, whether it's true or not, no idea. It's been my experience that there's something to it. But even then, it's not like, because when I would do past life regressions on myself, it was like, well, how can I be in multiple timelines at once? Like, how could this be true for me in like 1963, and this is true for me in 1959, and they're radically different experiences in radically different places. And what I've come to understand is it's a lot like a DVD, or and you throw it in and you're able to skip chapters, and there's some fluidity moving back and forth. But the movie Interstellar, right? So I love for these things to be underpinned by science as much as possible.
Right.
And when we look at the movie Interstellar and how you can go into space and then you find yourself on a planet where you might be on that planet for 15 minutes, but 40 to 50 years has passed when you're 60,000 feet or whatever it might be above the planet, the science supports that time is a construct. And if it is in fact a construct, do we get to then play with this non-linearity? When we put expectations on things, and this is also like, what's the purpose of life? Then it has to be transactional. And even though that's our understanding as a human, this is storytelling. This is really organized religion and governments and others telling us that there has to be this framework around this to make sense of it. I'm firmly convinced, Brandon, and that all the great spiritual leaders, whether it's a Muhammad in a cave drinking ayahuasca or it's Jesus running off to the desert for 40 days, these folks went out, they had some sort of a psychedelic experience, they come back, and then someone puts a church around it or a mosque or a temple. It's like the prophet Ezekiel. This sounds like a really crazy trip to me. And
Wait, no doubt, right? No doubt. And I think anytime you take some text that's over 2,000 years old, some things are going to get lost in translation, quite literally. And that's kind of thing. I always even like look at the number 40 days and 40 nights, or whatever is more in years. I mean, because look at you and I right now, and the age of 40 is really great. It's a really great YouTube. I forget who, Rupert Sheldrake maybe does like life begins at 40, right? And it's like it really, for me, it really turned a corner, right? Right around 40, and just turned into something so much, I don't know, different, better, cooler. I don't know.
Yeah, it's I was talking to a neighbor of mine the other day. She's 82 years old, and her partner passed away. He was the curator of the Oakland Museum of Art. And she's had a really hard time because they'd been together for 60 some odd years. And she's just a fascinating lady. And it's taken time for us to get to know her. She's pretty closed off in a lot of ways. But we were talking on the front porch the other day, and she brought this beautiful sage plant over for us. And we were talking about aging parents and what she's going through. And she's like, Chris, she's like, as we get older, ideally we pick up a little bit of wisdom along the way, but not everybody does. It's like, right. And, it did begin for me around 38. My 29-year-old son and I were out for a walk the other day when I was back in the Midwest, and he looked at me and he's like, Dad, he's like, they say that people can't change. He's like, but you did. He's like, look at you.
How was that moment, man? How was that? All the feels?
Beautiful. Well, because we're connecting, I had him when I was 19, right?
Yeah,
and so
yeah, crazy.
he's like, Dad, he's like, we kind of grew up together. And as he's gotten older and he has his first child, there's a different context, much like our experience with our own parents, when we became parents. And it's like, Holden, it's not that I changed. He said, but everything that I had hoped was possible when I was a kid is ad infinitum. And so it really feels more like I've remembered who I am.
Yeah. Yep. I love it. Yep. True story. Good stuff, man. It's really cool that you got to experience that with your son. You do a couple of other things too. I want to hit on real high level ones. I was just checking out your Instagram for a second. Tell me about the quantum field trips. What's that all about?
It's the quantum. I forgot about that post. So this was, again, underpinned by science, but, I'll oftentimes lead this, getting groups together, and it's not stump the psychic, but it's helping people find their own answers. And so as we're beginning to understand that consciousness, in fact, could have, some underpinnings of quantum theory. In fact, there was a report that came out today with the University of Alberta, where they've noticed in these tubes, in plants and in people, that light disperses differently. And when you apply an anesthetic, then they perceive that this gap could actually be where consciousness exists. And I know it's a mouthful and it's a lot to consider, but how do you then use these tools, these ancient technologies of meditation or breath work or just tuning into yourself to be able to intuit what's true? And so what we'll do for the first 30 minutes is talk a little bit about the science that underpins this. And then I'll have people work with each other to be able to start to help people find their own answers. They're fantastic. We do them actually all over the country. And, we certainly do them in our backyard. And again, giving people tools to be able to find their own answers is where I find the most joy, right? Because I don't.
Let's talk about that real quick, dude. Not to interrupt, right? We talked about practical, tangible things, right? And a lot of times, you and I are having a great conversation, but it's definitely very high level, right? So, what is a practical tool or two that somebody like you're talking about right now? They're challenged in life, and they what are some tools that you offer them?
So what I love to be able to do is connect with folks. And what we oftentimes do is find that one moment where it's either of significant trauma or they felt the most connected. And we'll begin to unearth how and where they feel that. As men in the body, as men in our 40s, we oftentimes turn off our feelings.
Yeah, they were turned off at 8, man. Come on now.
Right? It's just everything moves directly down into the root chakra. And what I've noticed in working with men is that we don't allow ourselves to feel. And so, because I love, working with fellows that are in a similar situation to myself, is noticing where in the body this is and developing a discipline. And that could feel like a dirty word, but discipline to me is really listening and developing the discipline to listen to where in your body feels most connected to what's true for you. And this can be done over the course of 3 minutes. It can be done over the course of, a couple of hours. But it's an intuitive exercise, and we'll surface up something that's going to resonate. and will then at least give you a rudder. So as you go into your next meeting or you go into your next day, where if your spidey sense is off about something, where do I feel that in my body? And then we start to develop a muscle memory around, well, if I listen to this part of my intuition and not over intellectualize it, what happens when I bet on that? And invariably, when people begin to tap into what feels right for them, what's true for you, that's not for anyone else to tell you. What's true for you is a very intimate and internal affair. And to give people tools to be able to tap into that, whether it's connecting with your breath or just being able to close your eyes and listen, it's developing that anchor. And then over time, we begin to leverage that more and more. And I know that's a very broad stroke answer, but it's all about feeling and listening.
No, I'm with you, right? So I want to nail a couple things down here, right? Discipline. I think that if anybody goes and they look up the word, it really just means how to learn, right? Like, I mean, it's not like how do you learn and how do you apply that, and not even like a rigorous like you're going to get 30 swatches if you don't do this correctly kind of thing. Having that develop that for yourself, right? Like they were called disciples. People, they were called disciples, and it's a not too far off a discipline, right? So it's really really about learning. I love too that you're sitting on what's true for you intimately and truthfully. God, where's the books upstairs? You got to be your own authority, Chris. You got to be your own authority. What's inside of you? You can't have somebody else telling you what's inside of you, right? You may need some work, right? With somebody like, especially as men, we shut everything down at a certain period. We grin and bear it, and we trudge forth. We sally forth. We grind and do all this stuff that like leaves us burnt out at a certain period, because we never paid any attention to ourselves internally, and we need to reconnect with that, right? We need to learn what these feelings are that I'm feeling, right? What is this that I'm feeling? Because that can be a huge frustration point too. I'm feeling this thing, I don't know what it is, and the next closest thing that I've got to it's anger, right? Because I don't know what it is that I'm feeling, so I'm just gonna loft this over into anger and be angry, right? It could be something else though, like in this huge spectrum of what feelings are. So in this whole piece of what you're talking about too is vulnerability, right? You've got to be willing to test that intuition. It could be a scary moment. I could be coming up to you, Chris. You could be my sales leader, and I'd be like, Chris, I'm feeling this certain way, and I'm just gonna go with. I'm saying that you don't know that I'm trying to come from a place that's coming from my right shoulder is where I'm feeling this intuition. That's a vulnerability, right? Because to men, especially, that's a chink in our armor. Right here is that chink in the other. My feelings right here. If he can see what my feelings are, he's going to poke at it, right? So, but if we do that and something good comes out of it, that becomes it becomes strength, right? It becomes like a really just an awesome tool. So I think that's kind of what you're sharing, right?
Yeah,
and getting
absolutely.
Into that. Yeah, awesome. So thanks for sharing that. So, Chris, what I like to do around this part is to lean into it's just like the fun part of the show, right? Somebody tuned in today. They tuned in at the beginning. They like what you had to say about like the beginning on like who your message, but this is a little bit like spiritual speed dating, right? Now, Chris, somebody out there is like, all right, well, depending on how he answers one of these two questions is whether or not I'm going to go spend some more time with Chris. So, spiritual bachelor number one. What is our greatest distraction?
Oh, our greatest distraction. Is the disconnect between our bodies and our higher self.
Talk a little bit more about that.
This dissonance exists between what we think is true or we want to be true and what actually is true. And we over-intellectualize. Think too much, feel too little. Thinking too much is the greatest distraction for me and for many people that I work with.
Too much in the head, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
Too much up there. I talk a lot about that and just the idea, and I'm sure you've run across this yourself, but in other cultures, the word for your heart and your mind is usually just one word, right? And it's our Western civilization where we've got the heart and the mind where they're separated. So we mentally have them separate, right? And so the disconnect, it's not an evolution. We started, we're like, oh, that's your heart, that's your mind. Yeah, keep the two separate, right? And so I think that's an interesting one for sure. Getting back in touch with the body. It sounds like you're doing that through breath work, meditation, and even just like, hey, where do you feel that in your body? I love that.
That's it. Yeah, listening is not simply an auditory experience.
Feeling for sure. Man, is current religion serving its purpose?
Yes, to those that need that education.
Okay.
Religion is a construct that man has put around spiritual experiences. And I do believe that we select the variables that were presented in this particular lifetime and expression. And if we're meant to be dogmatic in any certain religion or tenet or belief system, it's because there's something for us to learn there. So I'll say yes, but the opportunity exists then to prove out that might not be true for you, which can lead to some pretty radical self-inquiry and forming your own internal affairs. So that to me has been the opportunity.
I got you. So serving a purpose. Serving a purpose for sure.
Maybe not the highest purpose, but a purpose for sure. For sure. I get it. Well, Chris, a couple other things, everybody, I want to make sure that Chris does looks like you do some awesome work with men as well. You do some men's group, you lead some men's groups. I loved having this conversation a little bit. We touched on that, men's groups as well. You do speaking engagements. It sounds like you facilitate trying to get businesses closer aligned with purpose, intent, right? And being aligned and really engaging their workers, right? Yeah.
And what else would you want to make sure people know that who should be connecting with you, right?
Yeah, and it's a lot of organizations are just like people, right? They're organisms. And I think of Content Stack, where I am today is it's a movement and it's not an organization. And it's when you have so many people involved, it takes on an energy to itself. But oftentimes organizations, even though they may be noble in thoughts, they can often be weak in execution. They lose sight of their original intent or the founder's original purposes. And for me, and when I work with organizations like that, it's just, again, it's helping this entity or this organism remember who they are and then aligning the people that are there to that mission. So it's the mission first, then the team, and then it's you, the employee, or you, the CEO. So organizations that feel like perhaps they've lost a sense of themselves or want to perhaps create, it sounds altruistic, but perhaps a way for people to feel more empowered and invested in something bigger than the company. Right. There's an invitation for them to reach out to me there. And I just love helping guys that have grinded. They've done everything right, or at least everything they were told was right. And yet somehow they get to this place where it's like, fuck, I thought I arrived and I'm miserable.
Right.
And that's,
I've
been there and I can help. Yeah. And I love helping those instances as well.
That's awesome, Chris. Now, where should people go to find out more about you?
Just go to the website. It's Chris McCann, ChrisMccann.co. There's a contact me page there. And myself and my team of myself will gladly respond and just set up time to talk.
Awesome, Chris. Thanks for being on today.
Thanks for having me. It was a real pleasure.
Absolutely.
Really hope you enjoyed this episode of the Spiritual Dope Podcast. Stay connected with us directly through spiritualdope.co. You can also join the discussion on Facebook, Spiritual Dope, and Instagram at spiritual_dope. If you would like to speak with us, send us an email through brandon@spiritualdope.co. And as always, thank you for cultivating your mindset and creating a better reality. This concludes the most thought-provoking part of your day. Don't forget to like and subscribe to stay fully up to date. Until next time, be kind to yourself and trust your intuition.